semper Virgo, Felix celi porta. Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." The Lord replied, "If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you would say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you. Who among you would say to your servant, who has just come in from plowing or tending sheep in the field, 'Come here immediately and take your place at the table'? Would he not rather say to him, 'Prepare something for me to eat'? Put on your apron and wait on me while I eat and drink. You may eat and drink when I am finished." Is he grateful to that servant because he did what was commanded? So should it be with you. When you have done all you have been commanded, say, "We are unprofitable servants. We have done what we were obliged to do." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus.
A small private jet carrying about 20 passengers crashed in a remote part of the Bermuda Triangle. After the crash, all the passengers miraculously survived. So there they were on this desert island, all lamenting that they were in the Bermuda Triangle and no one would find them. No hope. After a few hours of this lamentation, one of the men finally spoke up and he said, "We'll be all set." And everyone was amazed at the certainty with he spoke. So he said, no, we're going to be fine. We're going to be saved. And they said, "How can you be so sure?" He said, "Well, you see, I'm a stock trader and I make over $100,000 a week in trading, and I tithe. My pastor will find us." Obviously, this man had a relationship with his pastor. In our first reading from the book of Habakkuk this morning, he is talking about a relationship with the Good Shepherd, if you will, with God himself, that has gone sour for the people of Israel. Habakkuk is writing in about 600 BC. The Babylonians have just conquered and captured Jerusalem. They've destroyed the temple, which they hold dear, the Israelites, and they have deported most of the population and enslaved them, and they now find themselves in Baghdad, modern-day Iraq. Do you think they're feeling a little bit low and like God somehow has let them down? Would that be a fair statement? And so Habakkuk himself voices the sentiments of the people, and he says, "How long, O Lord? I cry for help, but you do not listen." Have you ever felt this way before? And God answers, and he says to Habakkuk, "You tell the people this, the vision still has its time. Press on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. If it delays, wait for it. It will not be late." You see, the people of Israel, what you don't see here is that they broke God's covenant. They cut themselves off from a relationship with him. They broke friendship with God. And when you have a friend who's very influential and he's of great assistance to you and you break a friendship, there are consequences. And so Habakkuk is crying out, lamenting this lost friendship and asking God to come back. And in a sense, God is saying to Habakkuk to tell the people, I haven't gone anyplace. You're the ones who left. But I love you, and I'm here, and I am going to help you. My love for you has not changed. Put your faith in me. In the midst of all this, put your faith in me, God is saying. Like this covenant that was broken, on the other hand, faith is built on relationships. Some of you have seen that in your marriage. The more you become accustomed to each other in marriage and the more you deeply develop a friendship in marriage, the more you trust and have faith in each other. It's natural because faith is built in relationship. St. Paul tells us in the letter to Timothy today, our second reading, stir into flame the faith. For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice. And so St. Paul is counseling Timothy and his people, you got to stir that faith into flame. In other words, you've got to do something to spice up your relationship with God. And he says, for God did not give us a spirit of cowardice. That perplexed me, that word. What does cowardice have to do with a relationship? And the more I thought about it, it made sense. Relationships are hard work, aren't they? And they usually involve sacrifice. That is frightening. That makes me afraid. And sometimes, I have to be honest with you, I am a coward. I'm afraid to invest in a relationship. And I can also tell you from nurturing a prayer life of my own that the more you nurture a life of prayer and a spiritual life with God, the more deeply the relationship affects you, and that can become frightening because relationships cause us to change, don't they? And sometimes we're frightened about that. You know, when you're used to going to McDonald's or eating out of a dumpster, I'm not linking the two together, I'm sorry. But if you get used to eating in a dumpster, going to the Hilltop Steakhouse could be frightening because it's a change. I was reflecting in this understanding of faith and relationship on my own relationship with my mother. There are people in this parish, of course, who know me as a child and know my parents very well. And I'm probably the child in our family who gave my mother the biggest run for her money. And my relationship with my mother until my late teens was a stormy one at best. And later on in life, reflecting on that, I came to understand that most of that was probably my fault and not hers. Kind of like Habakkuk and the people of Israel. I went, however, at some point from rebellion and skepticism and cynicism concerning my mother. When I was in college, my mom and I at the time were the only two coffee drinkers in the house. She had retired and found herself having a little more time in the morning, and if I didn't have a morning class, I started to find myself sitting down having coffee with my mom. And over the course of that first year, my freshman year, I found myself getting to know this woman who, for a long time, I didn't really enjoy. I began to appreciate the brokenness that she lived through in her own life. And I began to see the sacrifices her and my dad made to take care of us. Coming to know her better made me appreciate how much she loved me. I began to see a woman of wisdom and great strength. I began to have more faith in her as a mother, and soon she became a very close counselor. But that took time to see. It took some nurturing. It took time to develop a relationship with her on a different level than I had as a child. If I may confess, since our new Pope was elected, I have had some difficulties trying to figure him out. Is there anybody who has felt that way? The news media says he's a liberal, and sometimes they say he's a conservative. He seems to make statements that throw out parts of our faith, and he becomes confusing. And as I've been praying about this, what I'm seeing is, at least when I look at his writing and his speaking, he is asking us to go back to basics and focus on our friendship with God. He's asking us to go right back to the very fundamental building block of having a friendship with God as the beginning of everything. To be more intimate with Christ himself. He's not throwing out our moral standards and the truths of our faith. And when he says don't judge, he's simply asking all of us to recognize that none of us has everything all in place. None of us. But we all have to start with that fundamental relationship of friendship with Jesus. I was thinking about statistics will show that conversion in the faith happens incrementally for most people. And usually the first level of conversion is the conversion to goodness. The person begins to develop a sense that I need to be a good man, I need to be a good woman, I need to be a person of goodness. Now, often that begins by having a very personal definition of what goodness is. It may not be absolutely good, it may be a little fluid, but it's the beginning. And in truth, most of the time when I find people who are not going to church or in some way even hostile to the faith will say, but I'm a good person. And they crave that. The second phase of a level of conversion is to move from this goodness to a sense of morality. And again, that sense of morality can be very, very fluid and not like what our church teaches at all. But for this person, it's a huge difference from what they were living before. And so there's a transformation in a sense of morality, and what's happening is the person is evolving and growing into a moral person. Like a mustard seed, a small beginning, but a beginning nonetheless, from which we can't expect to see the large tree yet. Pope Francis is reminding us that we need to be patient with people in their growing. The next level of conversion usually becomes the conversion to faith, to Jesus. But again, it can be a very fluid conversion. It can be very, very different from individual to individual. Many people will claim that they have a friendship in Jesus, and at the level that they're at, it's the best they can do. And maybe they can't embrace all the truths of the faith. Again, this is what Pope Francis is trying to tell us, that people are on a journey. And he's asking us to nurture people in the journey to its completion. One day, we were back there at the beginning too. So Francis is saying that we're supposed to be helping one another. Yes, we must hold to the moral and dogmatic truths of our faith. We must hold to these and never compromise. Yet not everyone is at the point in their life where those can be embraced. And it's in our expression of the love and the mercy of Christ that we can help someone get there. So sometimes people aren't ready to hear all this stuff. So we have to be patient and continue to witness the mercy and love of Christ. I was reminded of a couple of practical experiences of this. when I deal with engaged couples, we have a wonderful engaged ministry in the parish. We work very hard at nurturing that. And very often, you'll never guess what. Couples come into the office, and I'm filling out the forms, and all of a sudden, the inevitable happens. And can I have your address, please? And they both have the same address. And I can see the expression on their face as they're telling me what their address is, because they know that something isn't quite right. And so that becomes a very, very delicate moment for me. It's where I have to say, oh, don't worry. This doesn't mean you can't be married, but we're going to talk about this at some point. Is that okay? Yes, Father. All right, that's a beginning. Because they're there in my office and they want to get married in a church. And they want to get married in front of an altar, not at a beach. This is fantastic. So let's work with this. Now, very often, after some work, I will hear from the couple something like this concerning their living situation. Father, why didn't anybody tell us this before? Well, they weren't disposed to hearing before, but they are now. Why didn't anybody tell us the truths of God's vision of sexuality and how beautiful it is? You're hearing it now. And then I'll get a word from one of the parents, something like this. Father, how did you do it? Do what? How did you get my kids to start going to church? How did you get my kids to change their living arrangements? I didn't do anything. I just told them the truth in a nice way. It's time for a relationship of mercy at this point, isn't it? Another controversial thing that has come up with Pope Francis is, it seems like, the way he's treated the whole subject of abortion. I have to tell you that, and you should agree, that confession, for example, when someone is confessing this is not the time to start giving a moral lecture. It's the time to welcome somebody in the mercy of Jesus Christ. Because most of the time, the person coming in to confess this knows what's wrong. And that's why they're there. And they need to receive the mercy of Christ. That's what we need to do. And after that, if there's any need for teaching, it can happen because a heart is opened, although through a blemish. And what's interesting is, after some comments that seem to be the Pope Francis becoming lax on the issue of abortion, the following day he made a comment to the effect of saying that an aborted child has the face of Christ. That's a pretty strong statement. And before we become critical, we have to consider that there's a lot of us who may be repeat performance sinners, and we demand as much mercy from God every time we come to confession, no matter how often, sometimes the same thing over and over again for months. And we want God's mercy too, and it's there. I can only recall Hosea, the prophet Hosea, who was asked by God as a prophetic sign to marry a woman in a very questionable profession, if you know what I mean. Because he said, the people of Israel are like this, but I take them back over and over again when they come to me, because I love them and I want to cover them with my mercy. You see, our faith is built on a relationship with Jesus that may start small as a mustard seed, we're told. What's even more interesting is it's almost a rub in the face where Jesus links this mustard seed faith with this verse that say nothing more than we are unprofitable servants. Doesn't that sound harsh? We are unprofitable servants. I was meditating on that and it struck me. It's true. We are high maintenance. How many of you have made a profit on raising your children? You've made a profit. How many of you have lost thousands on your children? Okay. If you said anything else but yes, that you've lost thousands on your children, you're delusional. We're high maintenance. We're so high maintenance that we cost God his whole life. Yes, we're unprofitable, but he loves us. And he has no second thought about what it cost him on the cross for us. He loves us no matter what. Even if sometimes the only thing we can do is make a feeble attempt at doing the next right thing. So we're reminded that we must continually stir the flame of faith alive. In this stirring, there's some very productive things we could do. There's a marvelous book out that came out. It came out after the book Rediscovering Catholicism. Who read Rediscovering Catholicism by Matthew Kelly? If you haven't read it, I dare you to read the prologue and not put the book down. Okay? But after that book, he wrote a book called 4 Signs of a Dynamic Catholic. It's an easy read, but it gives you some good practical advice at making your faith practical and alive every day. One of the things that I'll fixate on today is he speaks of, in his book, he speaks of what would it be like to pray for 1 minute a day. If that's all you could do, what would it be like to pray for 1 minute a day with intensity? You know what? This morning I tried it. I can't give God my full focused attention for 1 day. I'm sorry. It's hard to do that. But he says, what if you strive for 1 minute a day? Just 1 minute with your full focused attention. Imagine that. And so I want to encourage you to do that. Take out your rosary. Pray the rosary. Become more conscious of the Holy Mass, especially on Sunday. I don't know how many times I hear from people, Father, it doesn't feel right if I don't go to Mass. Well, why? Because grace touches us here when we receive Eucharist, when we come to the Lord, when we sit in his presence. His grace touches us. And when we miss that, of course we feel it during the course of the week. Certainly. And so the Mass should be one of these places where we come and get our faith stirred. And we make liberal use of the sacrament of reconciliation. I can guarantee you that there's no trap door in the confessional that goes to hell. It's probably one of the few places on earth where you're going to be safe from that. And in the summertime, the confessionals are air-conditioned to remind you that you're nowhere near those fires. It's my favorite place to be in the summertime in this church. Praise you, Jesus. Okay. And so we stumble through and we continue to encounter God and be confident in the mercy and love of Jesus Christ, and to stir this flame of faith alive, knowing and loving and serving God, our loving Father. Amen.
Salve Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve. A te clamamus, exules filii in heaven, a te suspiramus, gementes et flentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ego advocata nostra, filos tuos misericors.